Exactly. They let me till last. You must be losing the will to live. Shall we just go? I mean, yeah. I can only go anywhere for a week because I only know 10 gems. He's heard 9 of them. So I'm going to get feedback. Where's the speaker? Oh, there. Great, thank you for your welcome. The walk through it has been terrific. The pace has been frenetic this week, I can tell you. I've been to places that I can't remember because I was sort of just a blur as I was kind of passing through. Sean did a tour of Washington for me, which was really great. Yeah, have you ever been on tours of Washington, of the city, of the downtown area? Have you been on the 11-minute version? It's a joy for a brief one, and that was my time off. So Sean has been a hard taskmaster. But my most meteoric rise of any student, I have to say, was Benjamin Akande. In May of 2012, he came on one of our programs, the High Performance Leadership Program, which I had the pleasure to co-direct with a colleague and friend of mine called Tim Morris. And Benjamin asked me if I'd become a visiting professor here. He said, of course, you'll be working in the Walker School, and I'm the dean. So I can honestly say that he's the first person I've ever had who within 3 months had changed from my student to my boss. It's meteoric, is right. Oxford does that to people. I can tell you some of the famous alumni. I thought I'd give it a go. We've had, no one's quite sure when the university was founded, by the way. 1096, something like that. What we know is that we had our first overseas student in 1190. I was telling people this week that I prefer to teach in executive education rather than undergraduates, because then I don't have to make a really rather important explanation, because on the back of my Oxford business card it says educating leaders for 800 years. And with the really young undergraduates I have to explain I don't mean personally. Though the evidence before you may look different. We've had 50 Nobel Prize winners. 26, at least I think I have, I can't put my glasses on, I think. 26 prime ministers, 30 overseas leaders, 12 saints. One US president, so St. Bill. What's the name of the space telescope? Hubble. He was an Oxford graduate. Who wrote Lord of the Rings? He was an Oxford graduate. Who created the internet? Sir Tim Berners-Lee is the answer. He was an Oxford graduate. Dr. Seuss was an Oxford graduate. And so was Mr. Bean. So am I. But we've only ever had one Barbara O'Malley come through. And she came in November. Anyway, you've got the idea. I'm from Oxford. This is Oxford. Since the Second World War, I mean, Oxford is really kind of plugged into English life. And the thing about hearing Barbara O'Malley speak is that, what fascinates me, of course, is that we have this belief that we can make things different, that we can, change things, don't we? Isn't that what we're there for? We don't just want to impart stuff. We want to kind of imagine that the implications of the stuff is that there'll be a difference somewhere, that we can actually tinker with the future by influencing the way the future leaders think. Isn't that right? Isn't that what we're trying to do? You're not saying anything. Is that okay? If you're nodding off, it's okay. No, people do in my lectures. It happens all the time. I have to just nudging them. Great. But when I was with Benjamin in St. Louis, my first ever time, imagine this, I just got off the plane. I told the story to one group, forgive me for repeating it, but it's a story I love to tell. I just got off the plane for the first ever time in St. Louis. Never seen the place at all. He took me to a dinner, and I hadn't been in the city more than about 3 hours. And he took me to a dinner at the St. Louis Club, and I was surrounded by the great and the good of St. Louis. And in a lull in the conversation at dinner, with about 20 people sitting around the dinner table, someone said in a very loud stage whisper to me, "So what is the purpose of education then?" I was thinking, I'm quite jet-lagged. I've got all these impressive people around the table. They're expecting something clever because they said, "Oh, Oxford, oh, Oxford." Feeling the weight of 850 years of history on my shoulders. And I think, my goodness, I could get this wrong. So, and I've never been asked a question before in my life. So I thought, anyone got a fortune cookie? I don't know. So I tried this. I said, the purpose of education is to enable curiosity. And by that I mean two things. One is encourage it, and the other is to give it the tools to do its job. Because I said, if we can enable curiosity, then we might enable discovery. And if we enable discovery, then we might enable prosperity. And if we enable prosperity, we might also enable progress. But it starts with education, which enables curiosity. What do you think?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Did I get away with it? The more I thought about it, the more I think it actually wasn't bad. And I'm more shocked than anything else because I really hadn't a clue when the question was finished. I was just about to start my answer. So, the lovely thing about this place is it's been enabling curiosity for an awfully long time. And this place has got such a warm place in my heart. But the thing about Webster is that it's on exactly the same road as Oxford. It's to enable curiosity. It's to enable curiosity in your students. And you're the people who will do that. I only once lost my temper in a parent-teachers meeting at my daughter's school, because the following had happened. An essay question had been set in her religious education class, and it said, illustrate your answer with respect to one of the world's major religions. And my daughter answered it with respect to Judaism. And the teacher gave her an F because the teacher had spent the term talking about Islam and wanted the question answered with respect to Islam. It didn't say that in the question. It said, illustrate your answer with respect to one of the world's major religions. So I gave the teacher both barrels. There was a shooting incident. Metaphorically, you understand. Because I said, the purpose that you, I think, have destroyed, and this is where it was because of this that I was thinking of the answer for St. Louis. Because the reason I was cross with that teacher is that she had destroyed my daughter's curiosity. Right. She had destroyed it. Just like that. And it's important to nurture it, but it's really, really fast to destroy it. You can kill it almost instantly in a moment. This place has been enabling curiosity for a long time. And that's All Souls College. That's the Radcliffe Camera, which is the reading room of the Bodleian Library. And my college is so famous and so important that in this wonderful picture of Oxford, it's there. It's called Brasenose College. The British Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer both were at Brasenose. You know, Barbara, I was thinking also, the reason I was fiddling, forgive me, I was fiddling in your talk, it's because you're making me think, as you normally do. And I was thinking, why is the brand Oxford, how do we try to promote it? Well, you might think, well, after all this time you don't need to, somehow it's got a kind of life of its own, but that's not true. Oxford does some very deliberate things to keep its academic roots in the forefront of people's minds. One of which is this. This is a ceremony called Ensignia. And once a year, the Chancellor and the Vice-Chancellor and the higher doctors and the most famous people that we're about to give honorary doctorates to process in all their finery through the streets of Oxford. And every single year, the TV cameras are there. We don't leave it to chance. You know, we've been doing it long before there were TV cameras. We've been doing it for an awfully long time. And Senior has been a ceremony for literally centuries, but it's just to remind people that the city has a very important academic institution in it. And so we try to do everything we can to keep the name prominent. And so Insignia is something which, who knows, maybe you could take over the Rams Stadium or something, or maybe even here, think of the equivalent, what could you do? Who knows? This is the Side Business School. I've pointed out many times how smart people are in Oxford. They've built an open-air amphitheatre. Do you know how much it rains in England? Okay, really smart people. I want to start here. Plutarch, my new best friend. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. And it was also that was in my mind when I was thinking that maybe the purpose of education is to enable curiosity, is to light the fire. Our job is to light fires. It's not to teach people stuff, it's to light fires and to fan the flames and to keep the burn going, to turn it into a conflagration, to turn it into an absolutely immense burning zeal for finding things out, learning things, testing ideas, creating and testing hypotheses, turning people on to the possibilities, not just teaching them what is, but tantalizing them with what could be. And then stand well out of the way, because you'll probably get your wish. And they will take off. They will be this amazing Atlas rocket that escapes our gravitational pull and shoots right past us. The great joy of having children, many of you will know, is that it isn't too long before they're an awful lot smarter than their parents. It's true of mine. I've got two daughters, 27 and 25. Both of them are quite a damn sight smarter than I am. And I'm thrilled to bits about it. And the same is going to be true of our students if we teach them well, if we nurture their abilities to light those fires. And that fire will just take them over, and we'll warm our hands in the warmth of the fire. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit, not about filling buckets, but about kindling fires. So let's get the bucket out of the way. It's about fires. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some ideas that I've got quite excited by. And these are ideas about leadership. I'm interested in leadership for lots of reasons, but not least because I'm absolutely convinced that it's an important thing to understand, an important phenomenon to encourage, and that there are things about leadership that we can teach people. But the next slide I'm going to show you suggests that maybe there is nothing coherent to say about leadership. This graph looks like it's from a geology textbook, doesn't it? It looks like it's the sort of substrates of certain parts of some immense country estate, like the one, for example, that Sean Coleman lives on. But it might be. It's actually not. What it is it's called business fads. Fads is a very important term here, because I want to talk to you about leadership and maybe things that we can know about leadership that might stand the test of time. But what this suggests, this, by the way, is from Richard Pascal, one of my Oxford colleagues, he basically set about describing what has happened to the emerging literature and research about leadership and management over a 50-year period between 1950 and 2000. And what he did was a very simple methodology. He simply went to each year's journals, counted the articles in them, made a note of what those articles were about, aggregated those into big topic areas, and so each year that topic area had articles written about it, you counted how many there were, and so each year you could see how many years that topic area kind of lasted for. And so the depth of each of these strata is the number of articles written. And the width of it is how many years through that time period that topic was to be found in the journals, right? And what you can see is two things. One is you could be a real expert in 1950 if you simply wanted to know about a topic in management and leadership. You could probably read all of it. You could know everything that was written that year. By the time you got to 2000, it was impossible. There was far too much about it. Because what you can see is this kind of growth that's exponential, literally exponential, in the amount of articles, books and periodicals that were written about various topics. The other thing you can see is that nothing that was there in 1950 or 1960 or even 1970 is still around today in the journals. Which rather suggests that all of our so-called wisdom about management and leadership is ephemeral. You know, it disappears pretty darn quickly. It comes and it goes. It's a flash in the pan. It's not a fire that's been kindled. It's a little and it's gone. And so what I wanted to do was to say, why is that? What is going on here? Why is there no dominant paradigm? Why is there no major set of ideas that have lasted on which other ideas have been built? And there is none. And what's more, as I work as a consultant as well as a teacher at the university, when I work in different organizations, for example, Tuesday I'm going to be speaking at the Boeing Leadership Center in St. Louis. And they have their own model of leadership, they have their own model of management, and many organizations that I work in have exactly the same. Rolls-Royce Aero Engines, when I go back, I'm thinking of continuing the airline or aeroplane theme, I'm going to go work with Rolls-Royce Aero Engines, and their chief exec, when he was newly appointed, tossed the Rolls-Royce Models of Leadership book on the table in front of me and said, "What do you think of that?" I spent about 5 minutes with that. I said, "I don't understand it, but it looks incoherent to me." He said, "I'm so glad you said that." He said, "I don't understand it either." And he was the CEO. But they've all got their own approaches to leadership. They've got their own set of ideas that they kind of hold dear for a while. And yet they will ask me, therefore, two things often. They will say, "Can you come and kind of run your psychometric and other rulers over our team and tell us how good they are relative to our model of leadership, relative to our model of leadership?" And I'll say, "Sure, let me understand each element in it, and then I'll figure out how to assess people against it." And then they say, this is a killer question, "Then can you tell us how good our people are relative to other people?" And of course I have to say no. They say, "Well, why is that?" I say, "Well, because your model of leadership is unique. It's yours. In order to tell you how good your people are, we've somehow got to have a common metric, haven't we?" And so what I was left with for many years in my career was this puzzle. On the one hand, people wanted to know how good their people were, but they were wedded to their own model. And so what I wanted to do when I'm looking at this is to say, no one model seems to be better than any other. What's going on here? So I tried to do essentially three things. Firstly, I wanted to see if there were some major common themes in leadership that we could use as a kind of a deep structure to which we could refer every other model back. Can we go back to the kind of origins and common themes and see if there's something under there that we can all agree seems to be important, whatever the surface structure you've created for your organization may be. Can we get down? Second thing is, can we make sure that whatever that is evidence-based? In other words, if people said, "Why is that in the model?" I could say, "Let me show you some decent research that shows that maybe that element should be in the model." And the third thing I wanted to do was to make sure that that it was simple enough to be memorable, 24 hours and 3 large drinks after people were I've been testing the 3 large drinks hypothesis quite consistently for several years, and I can still remember it. I don't know where I live, but I can remember the model. So those are the 3 tests. A deep structure to which everything might be able to be referred back. Secondly, evidence-based. Thirdly, simple enough to be memorable. And the point about the simple enough to be memorable is really quite important, because if it's important, then in any moment that you need to think about leadership and think what you know might be able to guide your actions, it's no good if the model is in a book somewhere. You've got to have it here. It's got to be there. You know, all of us know how to do, long division, But wouldn't it be awful if every time we had to do one of those calculations, we had to go back to the textbooks to look it all up? How do we carry the numbers? It won't guide you unless it's there instantly. So memorability was actually quite important for me. So let me just tell you the kind of conclusions I've kind of got to. So leadership, Barbara, Webster says that, just so you know. The argument in a nutshell goes like this, that leadership's effect is indirect. So it goes a bit like this, I think. Leadership, I've asked people this sort of rhetorical question all week. Wouldn't it be wonderful if when you took over a new command or took over a new team or took over a new organisation, when they showed you into your office, imagine, Barbara, they showed you into your office and there on your desk is this big button. And it says, push this button and you'll achieve all your objectives. Wouldn't that be great? Would you push the button? There's no button. Notice that kids don't come with a manual. There's no button that says results. Instead, you've got other buttons. You can push buttons like staff meetings. There's a staff meeting. I can call some staff meetings. I can push a button and do that. Pull a lever, and I can think a little bit about involving people in decisions. There's a whole bunch of things I can do, and I kind of hope that when you do all these things, it all adds up, and you get right to the end of the day, maybe the results will be better. Maybe I can achieve my objectives. But because there's no direct connection between any one action and achieving those objectives, you've got to kind of work with this indirect sequence of actions. So it's a bit like a kind of a trick shot on a pool table. You've got to knock one ball into another ball into another ball into the pocket, And that's not easy. And the key to this, for my money, is this notion of discretionary effort. Discretionary effort is the amount of effort that people don't have to give you, but they could if they wanted to. There's always a minimum amount of effort that everyone's got to put in, otherwise you'll fire them, right? I've given many people the tip this week, so I might as well give it to you as well. There's always one reference you can write to everybody. He left us as he joined us, fired with enthusiasm. Now, if you drop below this notion, or let's imagine it's a sort of 100 points on some sort of theoretical scale. So if you get to 99, you get fired, but at 100, you can just coast by, Now let's imagine that I could get you really fired up and motivated as my team. How much more than 100 could I get?
150.
150. Great. At least that's a good margin, isn't it? We had someone in the auditors and accountants who worked for government office, and they said 103. I thought, you must be a civil servant. But I didn't say that. But I thought it.
Don't get so right.
I did not. The point is, it's a big number. If you've got a team of 10, and you can go from 100 to 150, it's like having a team of 15. It's a big number. So that's one of the ways, and there are many others, in which leadership, by having an indirect effect, but it might go through discretionary effort, and that might allow us to have a kind of uplift in performance. That's the kind of idea at the back of my mind. And one of the things that we know is that if you start to look at the nature of the people in front of you in your team, you can actually look at the people who are attempting to make some sort of leadership, make a reasonable fist of leading a team. Then you can know an awful lot about how effective they're going to be by looking at who they are and what they do. So it's not magic, this. The evidence is strong. This is a study that came out in 2011 in which they were trying to account for the variance in outcomes like leadership effectiveness, group performance, follower job satisfaction, and satisfaction with the leader. Now, what they were able to show is that if you know their personality and intelligence, and you also know the approach to leadership that they're trying to follow, you can predict an awful lot of that outcome. And that made me think, gosh, there might just be a science of this thing. Maybe there's a kind of a science behind leadership that we can understand and know about. Not that it's a formula, not that it's a cookbook, but there are some solid facts that we can start to kind of work with and try to maximize, try to get on our side. And then I came across a wonderful meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is the lazy man's research method, and I love it. You know, I like to find these because this is someone else reads 58 papers and writes one. I read the one, and it's like having read the 58. I like it. A meta-analysis of 200,000 employees, just about 8,000 business units from all over the place, and they found that there was this phenomenon called employee engagement. Now, I talked about getting people kind of turned on, and maybe we could get to 150 instead of 100. But the idea is that employee engagement is that feeling of kind of commitment to an institution, a team, a goal, a plan, something that we're trying to achieve, and really getting behind it, really feeling hooked into it. It's hooked into you. And that's called employee engagement. It's another word, if you will, for commitment. And what they found was that employee engagement, or commitment if you like, was directly linked to this, and look at this list, I just think it's incredible. Profitability, customer satisfaction, loyalty, sales, employee retention, productivity, and safety. Boy, the reason I put a spray can on the slide, by the way, was I was imagining, imagine we could put that in a can. Wouldn't you want to buy that to spray on all your colleagues? And all these things happen. You get all this stuff that comes rising up really fast. The point is that is the leadership effect. It's the can. It's the things we can do to get people excited about, committed to, engaged with the enterprise that we're trying to get involved with. And the other thing that I found fascinating about this was that engagement and satisfaction had one biggest impact that was derived from the relationship with the immediate supervisor, the immediate boss. So, if I work in the parks service, it's my manager, not the President of the United States, that has a big impact on me, the biggest impact on me. The old maxim seems to be true, that you join a brand, but you leave a manager. Yeah. So I want to work for this organisation, but I don't want to work for you. So that was another factor that I had to somehow build into this, that there's an effect for this thing called engagement. We've got to somehow figure out the steps that leaders can take to increase engagement. So, engagement, incidentally, is very, very costly if you don't get it right. This is the cost to the UK economy. Gallup estimated that actively disengaged workers cost the British economy between 38 and 39 billion pounds a year due to things like low employee retention, high absentee levels, and low productivity. And someone worked out that if you figured out what the equivalent would be in a business of about, say, 10,000 employees, 20,000 employees, then look at the coloured columns, then you can see a beautiful inverse, in other words, negative correlation here. As engagement rises, so as you go from red to amber to green up the screen, so absenteeism falls from 10.68 to 5.95 to 4.67 days per year. And so do annual staff turnover costs. They go down from 31 million to just under 7 million pounds a year in the different groups. The white columns, incidentally, is what's happened to engagement since the financial crisis. The original piece of work was done in 2006, when you remember, everyone was happy. There was a world of justice, and except the bankers were getting a bit richer. Anyway, most people were reasonably happy, and your house had some value and that sort of stuff. But what's happened since then is that in tough times, people get an awful lot more engaged. Not surprisingly. But still, the same inverse correlation is true, that the disengaged people take more sick leave, leave more easily, and so on. So engagement, both positive and for negative reasons, is worth working with. And in 2012, Towers Watson came up with a further development of the idea of what they called sustainable engagement. And so they were saying that it's based on the variables that enhance engagement normally, so things like giving people a say in the decisions that affect them and so on. But you can have two other things as well. One of them they called enablement, and by that they meant if people tell you that there are various things that are standing in the way of their being able to be productive, like poor equipment or schedules that don't quite work or whatever it may be, then you've got to show that you're the kind of employer that will relentlessly drive out, get rid of those obstacles, to just give them a fair chance to do their thing and be as productive as they want to be if they can just get the kit to work right. And then also the issue is the promotion of their own personal well-being. So the boss seems to need to show some sort of interest in the people, not as units of production, but as human beings with their own kids and families and concerns and aspirations and so on. So very human things. So what we seem to need to do to that argument in a nutshell, which remember I was telling you is a bit like kind of playing these trick shots on the pool table, is add another line that leadership might be able to make a difference to things like employee engagement. And as a consequence, not only do we get discretionary effort, but also people stick around. Good stuff. Now, but that needs one more level of refinement, and this is really quite interesting. And that is that, yes, we've got this other line that I mentioned to you, but there are two different kinds of engagement. One is that based on what's called rational commitment. So we can work on people's rational commitment by showing them, for example, that there's good reason to believe that the organisation that they're in at any given time has a reasonable chance of making it through this tough period of time. So if we can somehow show them intellectually that there's good reason to stick around, they will do so. But that's intellectual. Notice it doesn't touch discretionary effort much. It's only the intention to stay. In order to get the discretionary effort, they've got to love you. Did you say love? Yes, I said love. Because, and isn't it odd that here we are in a university which is all about this, you'd imagine. But actually I'm talking about this. I'm doing it for good reason, because this is what the evidence shows. That unless people feel emotionally engaged with and committed to whatever it is that we do, they really won't give their discretionary effort. So you get the worst of all possible worlds if you stick up here. They're rationally committed, so they want to stick around, but they're not in love with you, so they won't give you the extra 50%. So that's not good. So we've got to do both. It's got to be hearts and minds. And the hearts and minds argument certainly works very well. Incidentally, the Corporate Leadership Council is a group in the UK who pool data from many different organisations on an anonymous basis, so they can kind of do a kind of meta-analysis of all the employee opinion and satisfaction data as well. And so their estimate is if you can move people from disengagement to strong engagement, then you decrease the probability of leaving by 87%. That's what a statistician might call a lot. 87%. This, incidentally, is an estimate of, these are regression weights. And if you're trying to look at the impact on discretionary effort of various other variables, then the direct manager sits out there at the top, 25% relative weight. The senior exec team is in the middle at about 17% relative weight, remember. But remember that you need to multiply that 17% by the total number of people in the organisation, whereas the 25% only gets multiplied by the people in your team. So that's 10, or whatever, 5, whatever it may be. Yeah? So yes, the senior team does have a big impact, or rather a moderate impact, but on a lot of people. So there's room for that. But the thing that to poke the cynics in the eye with is the data at the bottom. Notice that where salary sits, or compensation and benefits, if you add those two together, they only add up to the same impact on discretionary effort as the learning and development opportunities that are provided by the organisation. Notice that compensation on its own, relatively speaking, is something like a 12th as powerful as the direct manager's impact. So people say, oh, it's all about money. No, it isn't. It's about other things. It's about these human things. It's about these interpersonal things. And that's what the evidence shows. So, if I were to tell you what I concluded when I'd looked at a lot of evidence, I've just given you a flavour of it today, but I looked at stacks of stuff. I think these are the conclusions I'd go for. Leadership makes a difference to performance. It makes more of a difference in tougher times when opportunities are scarce, by the way. I didn't show you the evidence about that, but that's an interesting and very powerful finding. That in the sense, in the good times, anyone can do it. But in the bad times, it takes an exceptional leader to have a big impact. And the difference between good and poor leadership doesn't really show up in the good times, it shows up in the bad times. The difference between good and poor leadership. The effect's indirect, it's mediated largely through the effect on people. The impact is largely to do with the power of engagement and the effect on discretionary effort, so we can get the 15 rather than 10 people if your calculation is right. And the effect is a mixture of who we are and what we do. It's a mixture of who we are and what we do. The who we are bit's important as well. You know, some of us were talking on, was it Tuesday about trust? Was it Tuesday, Nate, that we were?
Thursday.
Thursday, was it? Wednesday. Some day before now. We were talking about trust. And issues like integrity, trust, and so on is part of this kind of human impact of the person that we work for. The question often is, do we trust him or her? Do we trust this organisation? Do we believe it's in good hands? Incidentally, there's been quite a lot of research done recently about whether people believe that their organisations are in good hands. The answer is about 25% of the people questioned say yes. 1 in 4 believe that their organisations are in good hands. So there's a lot of work to do on leadership, isn't there? And we can do that work together. Let me tell you what I came to as the sort of conclusions about what leadership therefore might be about. The first thing I'd like to suggest is that leadership is about creating conditions. It's creating the conditions for people and organisations to succeed and to achieve significant goals. Notice the old movie model, of the hero that goes out and fights the biggest of the opposition. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about creating the conditions. So if I'm a sports coach, I've got to remember that I'm not playing the game. It's the team that's playing the game. And I've got to create the conditions for them to win. For them to win. I'm a teacher. I've got to create the conditions for my students to do well. Not by spoon feeding them, that won't enable curiosity. But by enabling their curiosity, by giving it the tools it needs to do its job and encouraging them to deploy those tools in the pursuit of learning and knowledge. So I've got 4 propositions for you and I'd like to just share them with you. The first is about the territory of leadership. I'd like to suggest to you that leadership really covers 3 domains. The strategic domain, the operational domain, and the interpersonal domain. The strategic domain is all about tomorrow. It's not concerned with what's real, it's concerned with what could be. It's concerned with the world of possibilities. The verb that often you'll find disproportionately in the strategic domain is the verb imagine. Imagine. Or how did Martin Luther King put it? I have a dream. Notice he didn't say I've got a plan. So it's about what could be. The operational domain is all about what's real and now and needs to be done. Very pragmatic. The strategic domain is kind of conceptual, idealistic. The operational domain is ultimately pragmatic. And the interpersonal domain is all about the people that are going to be with us on the journey. So it's as if we need completely different mindsets to excel in each of these three domains. And if you think about how a strategic thinker works, and in fact I was down in southern Maryland earlier this week, and one of the guys who was sitting in the small group of 12 that had been invited to have a very long and detailed conversation about these issues, he was in charge of strategy at the base nearby. He was the #1 strategist for the base. And I just checked out these thoughts with him, and he was nodding vigorously the whole time. I said, when you start with a true strategic thinker and you give them a problem or a question or something to consider, what they do is they go up to a higher level of generality. They go out to include more variables. It's a strategic view. And then they leap forwards in time. So the strategist is constantly wanting to get a higher level perspective, a broader perspective, and to leap forward to a point in time when they might be able to imagine things being different. And then what they want to try to do is to kind of plot their way backwards from that imagined future, back to the present day. The operator, and there are many extraordinarily good operators in many walks of life, they do exactly the opposite. Look at my gestures. The strategist does this. Up, out, and jump forward. The operator does the opposite. The operator wants to focus on specifics, narrow the focus, drive down into detail, and then to step forward incrementally. Radical changes in the strategic domain, incremental changes in the operational domain. There's nothing good or bad about either of them. They're both good, but they're different. They're different mindsets. And if you talk to someone who's a specialist in the interpersonal domain, they're not so concerned about the task at all. What they're concerned about is the commitment and engagement of the people, the impact on the people. Put that in educational terms. On the left-hand side, which is largely to do with the task, that's like talking to a teacher who loves the content of what they teach. On the right-hand side, it's the teacher who loves the students. Yeah? And you'll know that, yes, you've got some affection for both. But you'll know that there are some teachers who are very much at one end, and others who are very much at the other, others are a kind of blend of the two. Isn't that true? Some people just love the content, others the people learning it. So, three domains, and they're fundamentally different from each other, but they are related and hence overlap circles. I'll put up the three pure cases. At the top of the diagram, what we've got is the issue of setting strategic direction. Notice I've not said putting a really clever strategy together. It's much too specific. What my understanding of working with senior executives is that the first thing they try to do with any organization is to imagine vaguely, and usually it is vaguely at the start, the kind of direction they need to head off in for the next period of time. So, for example, I do a lot of work with Prudential, the insurance company. And the chief executive of Prudential is a francophone African guy called Tidjane Tian. And he's based in the London office, and the Prudential is headquartered in London. And one of the things which Tidjane says, and he was incidentally the strategy director of another insurance company called Aviva, but one of the things that he will say to you is, you know what? The really growth markets right now in insurance are in the Far East. Seems to me we should be trying to orientate ourselves That's actually a pun if you want to think of the word orient. But we need to orientate ourselves to the Asian markets. Now that's setting a direction. He's saying the direction is east. He's not saying anything about how to get there. He's not saying we should move the headquarters tomorrow. He's saying that's the direction we should be trying to lean in, head off in. That's going to be where the next 5 years for sure is likely to be. In the interpersonal domain, it's about building relationships and keeping those relationships strong. And in the operational domain, the pure case is about delivering results. And may I say that whatever walk of life we're in, everything's always ultimately about delivering results, isn't it? I mean, here we're talking about results that are educational, but we could just as easily be talking about, on the one hand, winning a war, or we could be talking about growing an economy, or we could be talking about generating more profits in a business, or we could, yes, you can go on. Or a marching band wants to play great music. That's the kind of result that they want. It's not the process that the things are about, it's the results, and ultimately they have to be created and sustained over time. So in a sense, all roads lead to the delivery of results. Now the overlaps are important as well. What overlaps on the left-hand side is the business of putting the plans together. So what will bridge between this vague intention called setting direction, which is a kind of broadly strategic act, and the results that we've got to sustain day to day, is breaking that broad intention or huge aspiration into specific steps that can actually be implemented, and that's the planning and organising. And incidentally, one of the other things I've noticed as I've looked at the leadership research over time is that the leadership at any given time simply seems to reflect the mores of the time that it's operating in. So if you look at the ideas about leadership at the start of the 20th century, a very hierarchical period in our history, both on this side of the Atlantic and on my side of the Atlantic, you find Samuel Winslow Taylor's Taylorism, so-called. And Taylorism was simply as if the whole thing comprised just the three things down the left-hand side. And then we had, a really simple idea. It was that really smart people, you're nodding because I'm pointing to you, aren't you? Really smart people did the strategic thinking. Moderately smart people did the planning and organising. And you lot were expected to do as you're told, okay? Because these smart people have got it all worked out for you. And that was Taylorism, in a nutshell. And it came from an immensely hierarchical period of history, both sides of the Atlantic. Not surprisingly, because the time before that believed in the divine right of monarchs to do what they liked with people. Now, what's happened since then is that we've understood the rest of the diagrams important as well. So, down the right-hand side, the bridge between the broad aspiration and the people who are going to come with us is this phenomenon called creating alignment. Let me put that in engagement terms. Creating engagement. Creating alignment is simply a synonym for creating engagement and commitment, so on. It's about getting us aligned. Now, I'm no physicist, but the difference between a 40-watt light bulb, which barely would light a closet, and a 40-watt laser that can punch holes in metal, is not its power, it's the alignment of the electrons. They're not focused, they are aligned. And when you align the electrons, you give them the power to punch holes in metal. So the same metaphor is what we're talking about here. We're trying to say, if we can get a group of people aligned with a goal, with an aspiration, then we magnify their impact many, many, many fold. Not 150, go over 1,000, double it. That kind of aligned, that kind of increment we're talking about. And of course what bridges across the bottom is teamworking. And why is that important? Because teams can be synergistic. They can take whatever ingredients you put in, the people who work in the team, and you can make 4 people, by the way they work together, have the effectiveness of 8, 9, 10. Synergistic. So what we're thinking about here is all of the route between the vague aspiration of strategy and the results that we want to create and sustain over time. If you go clockwise around the diagram, yes, it takes a little longer to get there, But the multiplying effect of going through all these other stages is huge. And that's the leadership effect. So in a sense, what happens if you just go down the left-hand side of this stuff is you depend upon the compliance of your followers, who will salute and do as they're told. But if you go clockwise around the diagram, you're bringing in the engagement effect, which is a multiplier and a sustainer over time. Now, there are times, of course, when all you can do is go down the left-hand side. In a time of crisis, you want your soldiers, sailors, and airmen to salute and do as they're told. You want your policemen to do the same. You want your firemen to do the same. You want all of the first responders. You want anyone dealing with a crisis to do as they're told. If you've got a guy with a gun in the room and someone knows what to do, then do as they say, because the chances are it'll be better than not. So you want that effect. But what I would say is that if you want people to operate that nowadays, not talking 100 years ago, 200 years ago, but certainly nowadays, it's like every time the red light goes on, they will fall into line and comply, provided what happens when the red light goes off is that you then start to put engagement back in place. It's like every time you make people obey an order, it's like taking money out of a bank account. And you better make sure that before you start doing that, you put something into that bank account, because you're going to make some withdrawals now. And when you've finished and the red light does go off, this incidentally was an insight that I got from the Hong Kong police force when I told them about this. They said, that's exactly right. They said, the moment the emergency's on, and actually in their case it's a blue light, but when the blue light starts to flash, people do as they're told. The moment the blue light goes out, they've got to go back to building engagement. Getting people involved, getting people committed, getting them excited about what we can achieve together. Is this making sense? Now there's a reason that in that bit in the middle, incidentally, this is called the primary colours of leadership, and there's a reason why in the middle it's at the moment empty, is because I haven't put the word up there yet, but the reason is that it's white in the middle is because that's what happens with the physics of light. If you add a red light, a blue light, and a green light in the same quality and concentration and strength, you mix them together, you get perfect white light. If any one of those lights is diminished, you don't get perfect white light, you get a different colour. And if what you want is perfect, complete white light, you've got to have all three domains represented there strongly. And so I'm going to call that leading. Now, it's all about leadership, so why am I calling that in particular leading? Because I came across in Annecy, France, the week before last, a unique bit of playground equipment I'd never seen before. It was a three-way seesaw. It was 3 seats, just like I've got my 3 domains here, and a plate in the middle that the dad stands on, or it wasn't particularly dad at that particular time, 3 little girls, and it was up to him to decide which way went. Yeah? Now, that's the bit in the middle. It says, right now I think we need to have a little more strategic clarity. Good, we've got that. But the people are fighting with each other. I think we need to get the relationships a bit stronger. Yeah? Now, are we okay? Everybody all right? Yeah? We've got enough alignment? Yeah? We've got the planning organised? Right, let's hit the results button. You see what he's doing? He's just simply, or if you take the metaphor, conducting the leadership orchestra. Imagine all the other 6 are instruments in an orchestra, and the guy in the middle is saying, we need a bit more of that right now. Let's get some more alignment, please. Play it, loud, blow your horns. You guys just be a little bit quieter right now. Yeah? And then the next movement is, right, now results. Yeah? Don't worry about the strategy. Keep that to yourself for a minute. We need some more results today. So it's like making sure that at any given time, and as circumstances change, and as the journey unfolds, you've got the right leadership contribution at the right time. And that's what I'm calling leading. It's dialing in the right contribution at the right time. You know, what is it the chef does? More salt. Yeah? It's that kind of slightly different level of leadership. Are we doing all right, Sean? Good. Now, when we assess leaders, we look at those 7 things plus 1, which is to do with coping with pressure. Now, the thing about coping with pressure is that there are, you will know, particularly those of you who have served in the military, I know will know this particularly, that there are some leaders who do a great job when the pressure's off, but when the pressure's on, they don't do a good job at all. And others where it's just the reverse. They seem to sort of tighten up, stiffen the sinews, as Henry V said, and they seem to be, in great form when the pressure increases a bit. And there are certainly three different ways that you see people deal with pressure. I'm a psychologist by background, so I can assure you that this is sound psychology. There is one way of dealing with pressure, the image for which I'll offer you is this, which is that some people under pressure simply try to take all the pressure on themselves and just kind of withstand it. It's kind of, cowboys don't cry, and I mustn't either, so I've just somehow got to use good old Victorian fortitude and ride it out. I'll be all right. And it's called moving away from people. It's a particular pattern that some people use under pressure. They kind of retreat into their office, they take it all on themselves, and the pattern is called moving away. And we want to know, is that the way you will deal with pressure if I'm going to assess you as a leader? Or are you the second sort of leader who practices a pattern that's called moving against people? Some people, when they're under pressure, seem not only to pass that pressure on to other people, but to magnify it. So if I'm under pressure, you're under pressure. Okay. My favourite image is this one. For that. That's because I used to work for this bloke. His name was Brian. And if Brian was under pressure, everybody knew about it, and everyone else was under pressure as well, and I was one of them. So that was, And there's a third way of dealing with pressure, again the research shows, which is that some people under pressure almost need a stack of reassurance. They become quite dependent. And the image I love for that is this one. I got this from my 27-year-old daughter who was in public relations, and I said to her, Emily, how's your week been? I sent a text to her. She sent no words back, she just sent a picture. And I thought, I've got it, okay, it's been a bit of a rough week and she needs a bit of reassurance. Okay, so I picked the phone up to her. So that's what we do, we try to look at those things. Incidentally, a simple way of remembering the three domains is head, hands and heart. You've got the strategic domain where you're using your intellect to kind of work stuff out, and your imagination to imagine a different world that maybe we can just about stretch to if we get our act together. And you've got the hands that sort of make stuff happen. And you've got the heart, which needs to be engaged as well if we're going to sustain the engagement. Yeah? So head, hands and heart. So what's that bit in the middle then? Well, in this case, I want to suggest that little bit that I've called leading is a bit like, therefore, the nervous system, which does the sensing, the connecting, the balancing, the coordinating of the other contributions, yes? So I think that we can use a kind of somatic metaphor for that. Okay, here's my second proposition. So the first proposition is primary colours might well describe the territory of leadership, okay? That's what people have to do. The second is this. You're unlikely to find one leader who can do all of it really well. Unless it's you. It might be you. I mean, I've assessed 2,000 executives with my colleagues. We've never found one, but we haven't assessed you. So who knows, it might be you. But when I started to reflect on the day